When you've unpacked your Brown's gas machine, your first thing is to plug it in and switch it on at the plug, and then you'll see that a little flashing light appears in this top left-hand corner and it says power. Now, to switch the machine on, you just hold your thumb or your finger firmly for about 3 to 5 seconds on that flashing light, and when the machine switches on, which I'll do in a moment, you'll hear a little bleep, and because the machine has got no water in it, there will be 5 long bleeps, and that is an indication that you need to fill the water up in the tank. So if I hold that, screen comes on and the 5 long bleeps. And what you'll also see is a flashing little light here, and it says low water. So obviously we send you the machine with no water in it. Once it's switched on, the very first thing to do is to fill it up with water. And we've got the lid here, and all you do is turn it anti-clockwise, 90 degrees, and you can take the cap off. And then there's a plug, which if you turn it anti-clockwise, you'll be able to unscrew and take out this orange plug, which looks like this. And then there is a filter in there. So you can't see this because of the angle of the camera, but you can hook your finger under it and you can take the filter out. And you obviously need to take the filter out in order to put the water in. And I'm going to put that just in a glass so it's out the way. And so then you put the water into the tank and you'll be able to look at the amount of water by looking at the display on the front. On the display, there's a part here that says TDS, and that stands for Total Dissolved Solids. And this is essentially the water purity. You only put distilled water into this machine, and the distilled water should be what's known as 0 parts per million. So the parts per million is kind of the amount of particles or dissolved solids in the water, and it needs to be 0. Now, not all distilled water that you buy will be 0 parts per million, although it should be. And this water purity sensor here will tell you if the water in the tank is not pure enough. So it should be flashing in the green, and if it starts to become in any way contaminated or the water you've put in isn't pure enough, it will start to flash in either the orange or the red, depending on the degree of contamination or impurity. So the water should always be flashing in the green, and if for any reason it starts to get to the point where the water isn't pure enough, the machine will start to bleep, it will stop operating, and it will tell you here that the water isn't pure enough, and what you'll need to do is empty the tank and fill it up with pure water. Now, it's very, very rare that the machine will just become contaminated for no reason. It's almost always because you've put water into the tank to top it up, which isn't pure enough. So what I have here is some distilled water, and I've put some of it into the jug. One of the things that we suggest that you buy, which you can get on the internet, on Amazon for example, is a TDS pen. So this allows you to test the water for total dissolved solids before you actually place it into the machine. So you might be thinking, why would I need to buy a pen to test before I put it in the machine when the actual machine itself has its own TDS meter? And the reason is we found that through a lot of customer feedback that a lot of the distilled water that you buy on the internet isn't actually distilled water, or if it is, it's not 0 parts per million. And you can then end up putting it into the machine and then the machine won't work. Or if the machine had good water in it initially and you're just topping it up and it just so happens that the new water is contaminated, you might find that the machine will still run, but you're basically contaminating your machine. And it's a good idea to use a pen like this to test the water before you put it in. So if I show you how that works, so I'm going to switch it on I can put that into the water and you can see that that water is 0 parts per million. And so I now know that the water going into the machine is always pure. Now, if you don't have a pen and you want to buy a water which we can kind of say is almost certainly going to be 0 parts per million, this is one that we've used a lot. It's one that we recommend, and it's one that we have a link to on our website. So Bob's Best is a distilled water where every time we've tested it, it's always been 0 parts per million. So if you want to order a water and absolutely know that you're going to get 0 parts per million, that's one that we know that we can recommend. So I'm going to take this jug and I'm going to just fill the tank up. And as I start adding water, you'll start to see the water level rise in the little indicator here. So I'm going to need more than what I put in, so I'm going to add some more in a moment. But just to let you know that you have a minimum and a maximum mark here. And so the idea is try and keep it topped up towards maximum, because when you do that, the machine produces hydrogen much more efficiently. So you're going to get a better output if you keep it topped up. If you top it up when you first get it right up to maximum, what will often happen is when you put the filter back in, which I have here, it will often push the water above maximum and then the machine won't operate. So if there's too much water in the machine, in the tank, the machine won't operate, and on the display at the top here, it will actually indicate the water is too full. And then what you'll need to do is drain some water out, and I'll be showing you how to do that later on in this video. So the idea, my suggestion is make sure it's above the minimum and probably keep it kind of 3/4 of the way topped up towards maximum. In a moment I'll fill it up to probably about here, and then when I put the filter back in, I know that I'm not going to push the water up too high. So you'll probably never really need to drain the water out of the tank, even when you're traveling with it, unless you need to reduce the weight a little bit. But the only real reason to drain the water out of the tank would be if you've contaminated it by putting bad water in. Other than that, the only other reason to drain water out would be if you've overfilled it and the machine won't operate unless you've actually drained a bit of water out. So I've filled up the tank with the water, and what you then need to do is you need to place your filter back in. You then need your plug, and you just screw that back in, twisting it clockwise, and it doesn't have to be super tight. It just needs to be relatively firm. And then you put the cap back on, and you just turn it, let it click, and that's the tank full and ready to go. If we look at the machine from different sides, we can see on one side we have 2 outputs. The top one is for hydrogen and the bottom one is for oxygen. And one person could be on this side using both of these to breathe in Brown's gas. So Brown's gas is a combination of oxygen and hydrogen. And then we have some outputs on the other side of the machine. And so another person could be plugged into here, and we only have one output, which is for hydrogen. So 2 people could be using the machine at the same time, but only one person can be getting the Brown's gas, which is from that side, and the other person getting just hydrogen from this side. And the other option that you've got is to use the goggles which come with this device. So you could plug your goggles into this side for the hydrogen, and then you could have the Brown's gas going into a cannula, and you could be utilizing all of that simultaneously at the same time. The next stage in the setting up is to get these little beakers and essentially unscrew them and fill them with water. So you might not see it on the video, but there is marking that says minimum and maximum. And my advice is to fill it to the line just before the maximum. These are very similar to the machine in that if you have them too full or not enough, then it stops the machine from producing a good output. So all we do is we make sure we fill these with distilled water, which I have in here, and if I fill that up with sufficient amounts, there we go, and then we do the same with the other one. And then just screw them back up. And then on the machine, if we turn it to look at the side, what you'll see is there is a little place for it to slot into. So this part here can just push and then drop in. And then you do the same on the other side. And that's the next part of the setting up completed. What you'll find in your accessories are 4 long white bits of tubing, 2 thick clear bits of tubing, which are smaller ones like that. You'll find an adapter which has got 4 connectors to it and a Y adapter there. And so depending on how you want to set your machine up, you will utilize those in different combinations. So the first thing I'm going to do is show you how you could set this up for 2 people so that they were individually able to use the hydrogen on one side and another person could breathe in the Brown's gas on the other side. So on this side of the machine, this is the side that has just one output for hydrogen. And the way you set this up is you take one of these bits of tubing and you connect it to the top of here, connect it into here, and then slot it back in. And then you can use your cannula, which I have here. You plug your cannula in, and that's ready to go. So when the machine is switched on, this will produce hydrogen, it will bubble into the water, and then whoever's wearing this cannula will be receiving hydrogen. And they'll be receiving an output of 300 millilitres per minute of hydrogen, which is a middle of the range amount of hydrogen. So anything in the range of 120 to 150 is called kind of an entry level level of hydrogen, but that is a level where they've shown that there is actual therapeutic benefits. So this is more than double the output of our mini machine, which produces that lower end. So this is still a good output of hydrogen at 300 millilitres per minute. So we've turned the machine around, so we're looking at the other side, and this is the side that has 2 kind of output nozzles. One of them, if you have a look closely, the bottom one will say H2, that's the output for the hydrogen, and the one above it will say just O2, and obviously that's the oxygen. And to set it up so that one person can be using the other side and the other person on this side can be breathing in Brown's gas, what we would do is take, again, one of these tubes here, and we attach it into the top of the little bottle, plug it into the hydrogen, which is the bottom output, and then slot it back in again. And then what you'll need is you'll need a Y adapter from the accessories, and we're going to need 2 of the long white tubes. So we're going to take one of those tubes and plug it in to the oxygen, which is the top output. We'll just put that out of the way. And then we take the other tube and plug it into the water bottle that's there. And then we use the Y adapter to combine them into one flow. So now we have both of these coming into one output, and this is where we can now attach our cannula. And that's quite straightforward. So we don't have the oxygen going into the water because the oxygen will displace some of the hydrogen, so you won't get the same intensity of hydrogen breathed into the cannula. So with this setup, we would have therefore someone potentially on the other side of the machine who's breathing in just the hydrogen at 300 milliliters per minute, and this person is breathing in Brown's gas, in which we have 300 milliliters per minute of hydrogen and also 300 milliliters per minute of oxygen, and so that's a 1-to-1 ratio. So I'm going to show you now how one person can use the machine to breathe in the full capacity of Brown's gas, which means that we're essentially going to make it so that all the output tubes are filtered into one cannula, and it's very straightforward. For this, you're going to need 3 pieces of long tubing, and this time the X or the cross adapter is what we'll be using. So we've got each of the bottles on the side, and each side has that little plastic short piece of tubing linking it to the hydrogen output on both sides. And what we do then is we take a piece of tubing, we plug it into the output of the bottle, so that's one side. We then do the same on the other side, attach it in as such on that side, and then the other bit plugs into the oxygen, which is here. So each of these pieces of tubing is attached into one of the outputs, and we then use the adapter of the X or the cross to basically bring them all together. And then once you've done that, again, this can be around the back to make it so it's out the way if you wish. It doesn't matter which side you have it, but then you would plug your cannula into the remaining output. So if I attach a cannula, which is here, and I'll show you that running in a moment, but with the cannula, you'll see that if you follow it, you get to a glass cylinder part. This is something which you don't need to fill it up with water or anything like that. This is a water catcher, and what it does is it catches any kind of condensation, which means that you are less likely, particularly when you're using a machine like this, which is very powerful. There is natural condensation that will build up in the tubing, and without one of these little water catchers, you might find that you're breathing in little water droplets into the nasal part, and that can be a bit uncomfortable. So if that gets too full, you can just twist it to open it, you can empty it, and then just kind of slot it and twist it so it's back together again. But when you look at the actual nasal part of the cannula, you'll see there's the 2 bits that go into your nostrils and a little flap or flat bit that points away from it, and that should point downwards towards the lips. And then once that's in your nostrils, you then wrap around the ears in order to use the cannula. So a way that you can check if it's working is get a glass of water. It doesn't have to be distilled water, it could be just tap water. I'm going to bring the machine, just press on, and what will happen once you've switched it on is you will see, and you might not see it clearly on the video, but you will start to see some bubbling in the machine in the terms of the tank. You'll start to see bubbling in each of these little water cups. And then if I was to put this into water, you would start to see bubbling in the water. So you might be able to see that quite powerfully. And it will usually look as if it's coming out of one nasal nostril part rather than both. It's just the way it always looks. So that's a way of testing it, and that's all working nicely, and that's how you would set it up for a single person to use the full capacity of the machine, which is what we expect most people to be doing. And if you wanted to make Brown's gas water, all you would do, if I switch that off, would be to detach the cannula and plug in the water stone. I'm going to show you that next. So what I have here is a water stone, and if I put that into the water, you'll then also need the fourth piece of white tubing, which I have here, and you simply plug this into where the cannula would have been, and then plug it into the top of your water stone, and then we can switch the machine on, and it's the same process as with the cannula. So you'll start to see the bubbling through the tank of the machine. You'll see bubbling in each of the little water cups, and then you will start to see the bubbling into into the water. So I'm trying to make it so you can see that. So that is a really powerful output there. So you may not appreciate, if you haven't seen different power settings on different machines, that is very, very powerful. So I've seen what our mini machine will produce, and I can compare it to this, and this is very, very powerful. So generally speaking, when you want to make some Brown's gas water, you would put the water stone in, switch it on, and allow that to bubble away for between 3 to 5 minutes. And then once you've finished, you drink it straight away, because the amount of hydrogen is reducing almost straight away. So within even just a couple of minutes, you've already lost a good portion of hydrogen from the water once you've made it. And this is kind of the guidelines for a glass of water. If you were to have a glass that was twice the size of this is roughly 250 millilitres, then you would double the time. So if you were making maybe water for 2 people and you had say a jug, you could fill it up with 2 glasses worth, about 500 millilitres, and then you would run it for double the time. So you'd be running it for roughly 10 minutes, and then you could pour that water into a glass each and drink it straight away. If we just have a closer look at the screen, so at the very beginning I showed you that to switch it on, you just basically hold for 3 to 5 seconds on the power button, and that will bring the screen on, and the same to switch it off. So just hold your thumb or your finger on the power button for 3 to 5 seconds, so it's a long hold. This one here is, you can put it into night mode. So if you decide that you want to use this during the night and you don't want the screen to be so bright, just pressing that will just put the screen on a slightly less bright intensity. So if I bring that back up, this one here is your timer. So it's set initially when you switch it on at 30, but as you press this button, you can see it goes up to 90, up to 2 hours, and eventually up to 8 hours, before then coming back to 30. This is your on-off button. So when it's not actually running and producing Brown's gas, these little icons here, which are just moving up and down, just tell you that it's in standby. And when I then press start, you'll see it comes on at 600, and that means that the total output of hydrogen is 600. And so you're getting 300 on one side and 300 on the other side, and then when the oxygen is added in, we have a total output of 900. You've got your TDS meter, which is the total dissolved solids, which I mentioned earlier in the video. This is to do with your water purity, and you can see this is in the green. And just going through each of these in turn, starting from this side, this is the filter. And if the filter needs to be changed, this will flash, and there might be a little bleeping that comes on as well, just to tell you that some attention is needed. And usually the filter, depending on how often you use the machine and for how long, will last anywhere between 6 to 12 months. But if the machine hasn't asked you to replace the filter after 12 months, it's a good idea to change it anyway at that time. This is unbalanced, and this indicates if the machine isn't on a flat enough surface. So if you tilt the machine, if I tilt that, say, forwards, you can see it starts to make a bleeping sound, and that's just telling you that it needs to be on a flat surface. And what it's also done is, you can see it's automatically switched the machine off as well. So I would need to then restart the machine if it wasn't on an even enough surface. This one here says water full, and that would be if you overfilled the machine. So if you put too much water in, it's not going to switch on, and this will indicate that you need to drain some water out. This is telling you if the water is too low. So when I was going through how much water to put in, there was an indication on the front of the machine, when you can see how much water is in it, that says minimum amount. Now you want to keep it above the minimum amount, but if you didn't check your water and top it up periodically and it dropped below minimum, the machine would then be indicating with low water that you need to put some more water in. So although it's ideal to keep it topped up so it produces hydrogen and Brown's gas much more efficiently, if you didn't check on it, eventually it would tell you to top it up. And this would be the indicator that would indicate that. Overheat is just telling you if the machine needs to be switched off and left to cool down for a while. So in some people, they might be using the machine a lot. There are people who, for various reasons, might be using the machine overnight and running it for 8 hours. And if you're running it for really long periods of time, and at the same time it might be a very hot environment, or you're very close to something like a radiator, then there is the potential that the machine might get very, very hot and need a bit of cooling time. And this will indicate that that needs to happen. And then overpressure is usually telling us that there is a pinch on some of the tubing or in the cannula in some way, and it means that pressure is backing up into the machine. So that will indicate that you need to just check your tubing, check your cannula. It might be that something's pinching or resting on it, and you can then resolve that problem. So there's a lot of really good technology built into this machine, which means that it's very unlikely that something will go wrong. So the main thing that you need to do is just make sure that you ensure that the correct water, 0 parts per million distilled water, goes into the machine. And if you do that, the machine will run and run and run. The one thing I would say on top of all of that is always make sure that you store the machine with water in it. So if you're not going to use the machine for a while, leave the water in the tank. Don't drain the water out, because the hydrolysis cell, which is the part of this machine that makes the hydrogen, always needs to be kind of saturated in water, otherwise it dries out. So keep water in the machine even when you're not using it, especially for long periods of time, and then you should be absolutely fine. So I'm going to show you how you can drain the water out of the tank. So on the back of your machine, if I zoom in a little bit for you, there is, right next to where the power cable comes from, you'll be able to see there is this. And this is a cap that you can unscrew. And then there's a little plug, which I'll show you in a moment, which you pull out. And the manufacturers of the machine have this in the accessories. It says drain tube on it. And so the idea is that you unscrew. So if I do that first, you can probably see there's a little green plug, and then you pull the green plug out, and then this tube will be able to slot over where this screws onto, and then you can drain using this into a container. So if I zoom back a bit, I have a container, or in this case a jug. Now this drain tube is something which I find doesn't work as good as just simply taking the stopper out, because the drain tube doesn't really connect very solidly, and it very easily just comes away and then you're leaking water everywhere. So essentially the easiest way to do this, in my opinion, is just bring the machine so it's just off the edge of the table, put your bowl underneath it, and then if I just pull the plug out, you'll start to see water coming out, and what you'll see then is that it stops. And that's because the water tank is sealed. And if I was to take the lid off and then just release by turning the plug, you can start to get more water coming out, and then I can stop it by tightening it again. So if you only need to drain out a little bit of water, so for example, just say you overfilled it, you can take the little cap off, remove the little green stopper, and then a little bit of water will come out, and then you just release the stopper, which is in the top of the machine, and then you can let a bit of water draw out, tighten it to stop it, and then it's easy to put that back in. And that's very straightforward. And then you can put the cap back on. Now, there shouldn't really be a need to actually completely drain the tank, unless for some reason which I can't think of, the tank became contaminated. Maybe you put some bad water in and the indicator on the machine told you that it wasn't pure enough. That's the only reason where you might need to drain the tank. The only other reason would be if you're traveling. And so if you're traveling, you might then need to empty the tank, because it's not a good idea to have this machine full of water and then for it to be boxed up and then maybe turned on its side and so on. So it's really not good for the machine. So the machine needs to be kept upright, and particularly when there's water in it. When you're traveling, empty the tank and then refill it when you get to your destination. So hopefully that's my suggested way on emptying the tank, or just reducing the water if you need to.